So good morning. My name is Miss Jen and I'm here from Delaware Aerospace Education Foundation, or DASEF as we like to call it. So today we're going to talk about imagine your story from a scientist's point of view. Now I know some of you have done this program back in July and some of you have done all three with me, which is awesome. I love seeing all your faces again and some new faces as well. So today we're going to be writing a story writing a story takes a lot of imagination. So being a scientist also takes a lot of imagination. So when you're writing a story, it's kind of like engineering to a scientist. It's when you are storytelling, you ask what if, you're kind of writing your story, you're making the story take place or take shape. If you're a scientist and you ask what if, you're kind of making that solution or a problem or a new invention start to take place. So let's see if we can engineer a story from what you see in this picture. So those of you that have been here with me before, you know that this picture has a lot of things going on in it. So who thinks they know, they can tell me a story that's happening in this picture? Anybody want to tell me a story that's happening?
And the three bears.
Okay, you've got Goldilocks and the three bears.
I have one.
Go ahead.
It's the Little Mermaid.
You see the Little Mermaid in the story?
Yeah.
All right.
I have one. It's Jack and the Beanstalk.
Puss in Boots.
You got Jack and the Beanstalk, Puss in Boots. Good. So you guys are seeing a lot of them.
And Aladdin. Goldilocks. And the
Aladdin, Goldilocks. Good job. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things going on in this picture.
Rapunzel.
Yep, you've got Rapunzel. So in this is a bunch of fantasy stories or fairy tales, which are things that don't always take place in real life. So today we're actually going to talk about a different myth. So a myth it deals with ancient stories, such as the adventures of Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. So you have Hercules, you have Athena. You guys are probably familiar with Hercules, but today we're going to actually talk about Odysseus. So before we can actually talk about him, we're going to read a story. So as soon as it works, here we go. So we're going to read the story Odysseus. The Adventures of Odysseus. Odysseus sat slumped on the beach and stared out across the shimmering sea. Can you guys hear it?
Can you turn it up a little bit more?
No. Yeah, I can't hear it.
All right, let's try this.
The nearby camp
outside
the city walls of Troy, he could hear his Greek soldiers grumbling. "It's no good. We can't win this war," growled one. "We've been here for 10 years. 10 years. I vote we give up and go home," said another. Odysseus groaned to himself. "You're right," he thought. "It's 10 years since I left my beloved wife Penelope and little son Telemachus. 10 years since I left my island kingdom of Ithaca to fight in this war. All those years since Paris, the Trojan prince captured Helen, who is said to be the most beautiful woman in the world, and took her to Troy." He groaned again. 10 years ago, the Greeks, led by Odysseus, had gathered together an army and a great fleet of ships. Some said there were 1,000 altogether. They had sailed to Troy to rescue Helen and bring her back to her husband, Menelaus. Although they had fought fierce battles with the Trojans and many had been killed, they could not break into the city of Troy. Odysseus stood up and went in search of the other leaders. The soldiers were getting restless. "They want to go home," he said. "We can't give up now," replied one king. "I have an idea," said Odysseus, and he told them his plan. The wooden horse. For many days, the Trojans watched from the tops of their city walls as the Greeks collected huge piles of wood on the beach. They sawed, chopped, and hammered it, while the Trojans wondered what the Greeks could be making. Then one morning, as the Trojan guards on the walls looked out at dawn, they were amazed to see that the beach was empty. The Greek camp and all the ships pulled up on the beach had vanished. Nothing was left but an enormous wooden horse. They've gone. The war is over. We've won. We've won, the Trojans shouted. They opened the city gates and rushed down to the beach. They stared at the wooden horse, walked all around it, and tapped it. Why have the Greeks left this? One man asked. It must be a gift from the goddess Athene, replied another. We'll take it into the city. The Trojans dragged the wooden horse into the city. That evening, they all had a huge party with masses of food and wine to celebrate the end of the war. Then they sang and they danced until, at least tired out, they went to bed. When the whole city was quiet, the wooden horse creaked and a secret door opened. Inside were 10 Greeks. Don't make a sound, whispered Odysseus to his soldiers, and let down a rope. They slid down it, ran silently through the city, knocked out the sleepy guards, and opened the city gates. In the night, the Greek fleet of ships had sailed back to Troy, and the army was waiting on the beach. When the gates were opened, they rushed into the city. Before the Trojan men could get out of beds and grab their weapons, the Greeks killed them. They rescued Helen, made the women and children their slaves, stole all the treasure, and set fire to the city. Odysseus' plan had worked, and the war was over. At last they could go home, taking Helen with them. The Greeks divided the Trojans' treasures among them, loaded up their ships, and joyfully rowed away from the ruined city of Troy. Odysseus and his men set sail, and with a great storm which lasted for days, became separated from the other ships. When the sea was calm again, they were alone. They sailed on, stopping at islands where sometimes the crew had to fight battles to escape, and sometimes were welcomed and given food and water. Storms drove their ship across wild seas and past rocky shores where they couldn't land. When the wind dropped, they had to row until they were too tired to go on. Cyclops, the one-eyed giant. After many months, Odysseus and his men reached an island where they landed to find food and water. There were no people, but at the top of the cliff they could see a huge cave. "We'd better explore," said Odysseus. He picked up a skinful of wine and led his men across the island. As they found no one, they decided to climb the cliff to the cave. Odysseus stopped at the entrance, peered in, and shouted, "Anyone there?" There was no reply. He stepped in and looked around. In the cave were enormous bowls of milk and cheese. "Let's eat while we wait for the owners to come back," Odysseus said to his hungry men. Suddenly they heard a thunderous noise and sprang to their feet. A Cyclops, a giant with only one eye, filled the entrance, blocking out the sun. He herded a flock of sheep into the cave. Then he rolled a massive rock across the entrance to close it like a door. The Cyclops glared at the Greeks with his one huge eye. "Who are you and what are you doing in my cave?" he roared. "We are Greek soldiers on our way home to Ithaca from Troy," said Odysseus. "We were looking for fresh food and water." Before they could move, the Cyclops grabbed 2 men in his enormous fist and stuffed them into his mouth. Odysseus and his men stared in horror. "Quick, get behind those rocks," whispered Odysseus, and they dashed to the dark corner of the cave. They watched the Cyclops lie down and go to sleep. "We must kill him before he eats us all," whispered one of the men. "No," replied Odysseus. "If we kill him, we'll be trapped in here. We'd never be able to move that rock from across the entrance. We must wait." Next morning, the Cyclops woke up, rolled away the rock, and herded his sheep out of the cave. Before Odysseus and his men could slip out, he rolled the rock back again, trapping them inside the cave. "I have a plan," said Odysseus. "I need a big wooden pole." They searched the cave until they found one and hid it behind some rocks. Then they waited until the Cyclops came back. In the evening, the Cyclops rolled back the rock and herded in his sheep, closing the entrance again. Odysseus poured wine from his wineskin into a huge bowl. He offered it to the Cyclops, who drank the wine, and Odysseus filled the bowl again. "What's your name?" asked the Cyclops. "I'm nobody," said Odysseus, pouring more wine into the bowl. "That's a very strange name," laughed the Cyclops, and he lied down and was soon snoring loudly. "Now's our chance," Odysseus said to his men. "Bring me the pole from behind the rocks." Holding the pole, Odysseus crept up to the sleeping Cyclops and pushed it into his one eye. The Cyclops leapt up and stumbled around the cave, shouting and roaring. The other Cyclops on the island heard the noise. "What's the matter?" they called. "Nobody has hurt me. Nobody has blinded me," cried the Cyclops. "If nobody has hurt you, why are you making all that noise?" they asked, and they went back to their caves muttering, "He's gone crazy." Next morning, the Cyclops rolled away the rock from the cave to let out his sheep. "You'll never escape," he shouted, but Odysseus had a plan. He tied the sheep together in threes. "Lie down and hold on to the middle sheep," he ordered his men. As the sheep trotted past the Cyclops, he stroked their backs, but he didn't feel the men clinging on underneath. When they were all outside the cave, Odysseus shouted, "Run for the ship!" They raced down to the shore and rowed their ship away as fast as they could. The Cyclops heard them go and roared with rage. He hurled huge rocks at the ship, but as he couldn't see it, they all missed. Odysseus and his men thought they were safe. The Cyclops was a son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. He begged his father to take revenge on the Greeks who had blinded him. Poseidon promised he would punish them. A bag of winds. Odysseus and his men sailed on and landed on another island. There, King Aeolus, who was the keeper of the winds, welcomed them. He held feasts for them, and they stayed happily for many weeks with the king, his wife, and their sons and daughters. When it was time to leave, King Aeolus gave Odysseus a leather bag. "I've put in it the north, south, and east winds," he said, "but left out the west wind. This gentle wind will blow you eastward to Ithaca." Odysseus thanked the king and took the bag on board his ship. As soon as the crew hoisted the sail, the west wind wafted the ship along. Odysseus didn't tell his men what was in the leather bag, and they were curious. One day when Odysseus was asleep, one man said, "Let's open the bag. Perhaps there's treasure in it," and he untied it. Out flew the north, south, and east winds in a terrible storm, which blew the ship back the way it had come. There was nothing they could do to stop it. Circe's magic. The ship raced on and at last reached another island. Odysseus sent a group of men led by Eurylochus to find food and water while he and the other men guarded the ship. He didn't want to be captured by more giants. Eurylochus and his friends set off and walked for hours without meeting anyone. At last they saw a palace through the trees. When they reached it, a beautiful woman came out. She smiled at them. "I'm Circe. Come in, you must be hungry." She led them into a huge hall where huge plates of food were laid out on the table. The men ate and drank as much as they could. They laughed and sang, thanked Circe for her kindness, and didn't even notice that Eurylochus wasn't with them. He had been suspicious of this woman. When the men had gone into the palace, he had stayed outside and watched through a window. As soon as the feast was over, Circe waved her magic wand, and the men instantly turned into pigs. Then she drove them, grunting, out of the palace. Eurylochus ran back to the ship and told Odysseus what he had seen. "I must rescue them," said Odysseus, and picked up his weapons. He ran to the palace. On the way, he was startled to see Hermes, the messenger of the gods, flying near him. "The goddess Athene sent me to give you this flower called Hermes. Eat it, and you'll be safe from Circe's magic." Odysseus thanked him and quickly ate the white flower. When he reached the palace, Circe came out to meet him. "Come in," she smiled. "You must be hungry." Odysseus thanked her and went in, certain he would be safe. Circe handed him a cup of wine which had a magic potion in it. She watched Odysseus drink it and then tapped his arm with her magic wand. Instead of turning into a pig, Odysseus jumped up and pointed his sword at her. "Take me to my men," he ordered. Circe was terrified because her magic hadn't worked. She led Odysseus out of the palace to a pen full of pigs. "Change them back," commanded Odysseus. Circe rubbed magic ointment over the pigs, and immediately they became human again. "Come back to my palace and we'll have another feast. No more magic potions, I promise you," said Circe. Odysseus and his men accepted. They sent for the men guarding the ship and stayed with Circe, enjoying themselves for a whole year. At last, Odysseus sighed, "It's time we went home." Circe was very sad. She had fallen in love with Odysseus, but knew he had to leave her. She gave him food and water for the voyage and warned him of the many new dangers that were ahead of him. The Sirens. Odysseus' ship sailed on and soon came to a very rocky island. Here, sirens, who were sea nymphs, sat on the rocks and sang enchanting songs to the ships that passed. Sailors were lured to the island. Their ships were wrecked on the rocks, and they were drowned. Circe had warned Odysseus about the sirens, but he wanted to hear their songs. "Tie me to the mast," he told his men, "and then fill your ears with beeswax. Don't take it out until we're well past this island." They did as he ordered. Then they started to row. The sirens sang their enchanting songs, but the men couldn't hear them. Furious that the ship was getting away, the sirens sang louder and louder. Only Odysseus fell under their spell and struggled with the ropes that held him. "Untie me, let me free, they're calling me. I must go to them," he shouted, but the men couldn't hear him. They rowed steadily on and on until they were at a safe distance. Then they untied Odysseus's ropes and took the wax out of their ears. Scylla and Charybdis. Odysseus and his men sailed on until, in front of them, they saw towering cliffs with a narrow channel between them. Then they heard a great roaring noise. In the channel was a giant whirlpool, a mass of swirling water which sucked ships down to the bottom of the sea. It was called Charybdis. They had to go through the channel. There was no other way. Odysseus shouted, "Row as hard as you can, pull for your lives." He steered the ship as close to the cliffs as he dared, so they could slip past the whirlpool. The men rowed hard, watching the whirlpool. They didn't see the Scylla, the six-headed monster, loom out of her cave high up on the cliffs. Suddenly, she shot out her 6 heads and snatched up 6 men. They shouted once, then were silent. She had swallowed them. "Row on," shouted Odysseus. Soon the ship was out of reach of the Scylla and past the whirlpool. The wind blew, filling the big sail, and the tired crew could rest. The sacred cattle. The ship soon reached another island. Odysseus warned his men not to touch the cows here. They belonged to the god Helios, he said. The men hunted wild animals and fish to eat. But when Odysseus was away from the camp, they killed and roasted a calf. When Odysseus returned and found them eating meat, he was afraid. "The gods will punish us for this," he said. Helios found out what they'd done and was really angry. Storm and shipwreck. After a week on the island, Odysseus and his crew put to sea again. At first, the ship sailed gently along, but then the wind grew stronger and stronger. Dark clouds filled the sky and thunder crashed. The storm had been sent by Helios. "Take down the sail," shouted Odysseus. The crew struggled, but it was too late. The mast snapped and fell over the side. Then a huge wave washed over the ship, turning it over and sinking it. Odysseus clung to the broken mast, shouting again and again to his men, but they had all drowned. The wind and waves pushed the mast along until after 9 days it washed up on a beautiful island. The goddess Calypso. The island was ruled by the goddess Calypso. She took Odysseus to her palace where he lived, enchanted by her for 7 years. She loved him and begged him to stay with her forever. But each day he sat on the beach staring out to sea, longing for his rocky island of Ithaca. At last, the goddess Athene went to Zeus and said, "It's time we help this wanderer to go home." Zeus agreed and sent his messenger Hermes to tell Calypso she must let Odysseus go. Calypso had to obey the order and gave Odysseus the wood and tools he needed to build a boat. When it was finished, Calypso sadly said goodbye to Odysseus. He sailed for days with a good breeze, but then Poseidon, to avenge his son the Cyclops, whom Odysseus had blinded, sent a terrible storm. It wrecked the small ship and flung Odysseus into the sea. Athene wouldn't let Odysseus drown. She watched as he clung to the wreckage of his ship until he saw land. He swam to it and crawled, soaked and exhausted, up to the beach where he lay in despair. Next morning, a princess was walking along the shore and found Odysseus still lying on the beach. She took him to her father, King Alcinous, who greeted him kindly and fed and clothed him. When Odysseus told him of his voyage, the king said, "Your island of Ithaca is quite near here. Stay here tonight, and tomorrow one of my ships will take you home." Home at last. At dawn, Odysseus boarded a ship. lay down and fell asleep. He was still fast asleep when the ship reached Ithaca. The sailors carried him ashore and left him on the beach. Then they sailed the ship away. Poseidon, the god of the sea, was watching. He was angry that Odysseus had reached home safely, and to take revenge on the sailors who had helped him, he rose above the waves and pointed at the ship. In an instant, the ship turned to stone. Poseidon smiled and sank down into the sea again. Odysseus woke up on the beach and looked around him. He didn't know where he was. Suddenly, a beautiful woman appeared. "I am the goddess Athene," she said. "I've come to help you. You've been away from Ithaca for so long. Many people think you're dead and will never come back. The nobles on the island want to marry your wife Penelope and take your kingdom." Odysseus leapt up. "I must go and save her," he said. "Not so fast," said Athene. "These men want to get rid of your son, Telemachus, and they will kill you too. But I have a plan. I'll disguise you as an old beggar. You are then to go to the swineherd's hut. I'll send Telemachus to meet you there." She raised her hand, and Odysseus at once looked like an old beggar, dressed in rags. He thanked Athene and hurried to the hut. The swineherd didn't recognize Odysseus. "Come in and eat with me," he said. "There's not much, but you must be hungry." Odysseus thanked him, and after they had eaten, he said, "Tell me what's happening in Ithaca." "Bad news," said the swineherd. "King Odysseus sailed for Troy 20 years ago and hasn't been heard of since." The door of the hut opened, and a tall young man stepped in. "Prince Telemachus," cried the swineherd, jumping up. "Who's this?" asked Telemachus, looking at Odysseus. Odysseus stood up. "I am your father," he said. "You can't be. You're a beggar," cried Telemachus. "The goddess Athene disguised me so no one would recognize me," replied Odysseus. "Now I've heard that the nobles want to marry your mother. Tell me about them." Telemachus stared at Odysseus, wondering if what he said was true. Then he said, "They come every day and ask my mother which one of them she will marry. She used to say she would choose one when she had finished her weaving. But then they found out that each night she unpicked her day's weaving so that it would never be finished. They're really unpleasant now. They eat and drink our food and wine, and I know they want to kill me." Odysseus, Telemachus, and the swineherd hurried to the palace. There the nobles were feasting as usual. Odysseus shambled in and begged for food. They all gave him a few scraps except one who threw a stool at him. After the nobles had gone to bed that night, Odysseus and Telemachus took all the weapons from the hall and hid them in the cellar. Penelope had heard there was a beggar in the hall and sent for him. Odysseus kept his face in shadow. He didn't want Penelope to recognize him yet. "Have you heard any news of Odysseus?" asked Penelope. "He is alive and well and will soon return to Ithaca," Odysseus growled to disguise his voice. "Thank you," sighed Penelope. "My old nurse will give you food." Odysseus quickly left the room. The test of strength. When the nobles came into the hall the next morning, Odysseus was there waiting for them. He listened to them talking and grumbling about Penelope, but said nothing. After they had eaten breakfast, Penelope walked in carrying a huge bow. "I have decided to give you all a test of strength," she said. "This bow belonged to my husband Odysseus. I will marry the man who can put the string on and shoot an arrow through the handles of 12 axes." Telemachus set up the target of the 12 axes. The nobles argued about who should go first. They were all eager to show how strong they were. The first one picked up the bow and tried to put on the string, but however hard he struggled, he couldn't even bend the bow. The others jeered at him. Then they tried one after the other, but they all failed. They grumbled that the bow was old and stiff. It wasn't that they weren't strong enough. Odysseus stepped forward. "May I try?" he asked. The nobles jeered. "A beggar wants to marry a queen," sneered one. "Let him try," ordered Penelope. Odysseus whispered to Telemachus, "Take your mother to her room." Telemachus hurried away with Penelope and soon returned. Very quietly, he closed and locked the doors of the hall. Odysseus picked up the bow, bent it easily, and put on the string. He slotted an arrow on the bow, pulled, and shot it straight through the 12 axes. At that moment, a fiend changed Odysseus from an old beggar back to his usual tall, strong self, dressed in fine clothes, and armed him with a sharp sword and a long spear. Odysseus, gasped the nobles. They reached for their weapons, but they found they weren't there. In a panic, they rushed for the doors, but they were locked in. One noble managed to slip out and find the weapons hidden in the cellar. Drawing his sword, Telemachus ran to his father's side, and together they fought a terrible battle. Although they were hugely outnumbered, they managed to kill all the nobles. The old nurse, who was hiding behind a pillar, ran to tell Penelope what she had seen. Penelope hurried to the hall. She stared at Odysseus. She hadn't seen him for 20 years. "Are you really my husband? Or is this a trick the gods are playing on me?" she asked. "Yes, my dear and faithful wife," replied Odysseus, "I am." Penelope was still not certain and thought of a test. "Go to my bedroom and move the bed into another room," she said to the old nurse. "You can't do that. I built that bed around a tree. It can't be moved," said Odysseus. "Only you and I know about the tree. That proves you really are Odysseus," said Penelope, and she threw her arms around him. "Yes, I've come home at last to reclaim my wife and my kingdom," replied Odysseus, smiling at her. "And you'll never believe all the adventures I have to tell you and my brave son, Telemachus, about."
All right. So that is the story of Odysseus. It was a lot. It's definitely a myth. It's something that didn't always happen, but it is a story that is passed down about all the Greek gods and goddesses. So using this information, we need your help to help Odysseus build a boat. But before we can start, let's learn about what makes things float or sink.
Kids want to know. Have you ever taken a bath or played in a swimming pool, lake, or ocean? Maybe you've noticed that there are some things that make really good bath or pool toys, and other things, well, not so much. The term buoyancy refers to how well something floats or sinks. If something is able to float, we would say that it's buoyant. So, what makes something float or sink? Generally, we can determine if something can float by feeling its weight. Usually, if something is light, it floats or is positively buoyant. If it's heavy, then it sinks or is negatively buoyant. This is an easy enough explanation for us to accept, right? But the idea becomes shaky when we consider why something really, really heavy, like a cruise ship, is able to float. To understand this, we need to understand the concept of density. Density is the amount of stuff or mass something has inside of it compared to its volume or size. For example, if we look at this bucket full of sand, we would say that it's more dense than this identical empty bucket because the bucket full of sand has more stuff. It's got more mass. Another example is this bowling ball. It has more mass than a basketball because a basketball is full of air, but a bowling ball is full of stuff. So even though the bowling ball is smaller, it's more dense than the basketball. So what does this have to do with buoyancy? The next concept we need to tackle is called Archimedes' principle. Archimedes was a mathematician and philosopher who lived in ancient Greece. He had been stumped on a problem he was trying to figure out for the king, so he decided to take a bath. When he was sitting in the bath, he noticed that the water level rose when he went into the bath. Let's pretend that this block is Archimedes. See how the water level goes up when the block goes into the water? This means that in order to make space for his body in the bath, the water had to get pushed around in the bath, making the water level rise. The story goes that he was so excited by this discovery that he jumped out of the bath and ran naked down the street to his laboratory, shouting, "Eureka!" which means, "I've got it!" Basically, what Archimedes' principle helps us to understand is that if an object is heavier than the amount of water that it's displaced, or is something very dense, the object will sink, like the bowling ball. And if the object is lighter than the amount of water it is displaced, or something not very dense, the object will float, like the basketball. So, back to our cruise ship problem. Even though a cruise ship is very heavy, it's also very, very large. Most of the ship is also hollow, so it's not as dense as you might think. Because of this, just like the basketball, the ship is actually lighter than the water it's displaced, causing it to float. Did you know? Submarines dive by allowing water to fill part of the submarines, called ballasts. The air gets vented out until the density of the sub is enough to make it sink. Ships also use ballasts for balance. Without them, they have a tendency to tip in windy weather. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.
All right. So we need to help Odysseus build a boat. So using your materials, what is the strongest, the thing that can hold the most weight, and fastest, travel the furthest, can you build? So we are going to give you 10 minutes to use whatever materials you have, whether it be aluminum foil, paper, tape, plastic cups, styrofoam cups, whatever you have, to build a boat that will float. Maybe it's the furthest traveled by blowing on a sail. Maybe it's the strongest boat by holding the most weight or pennies. So we're going to give you 10 minutes right now to build whatever you can build. And remember, you can be like Odysseus. He took several tries for him to get home, but he never gave up. That would be a true scientist. Happy building. You guys are working hard. I see lots of different materials being used, which is awesome. I like the creativity I'm seeing. Good job, guys. Some of you guys look like you're building some really strong boats. I see some pretty big sails. They should be some really fast boats. I love all the teamwork I'm seeing. You guys are true scientists. You guys have about 3 minutes left, and if you're done, perfect. If you don't finish in the next 3 minutes, it's okay. We're just gonna share our boats and what we've done so far. Lots of different looking boats. Can't wait to see them all. About 30 seconds left. And like I said, it's okay if you don't finish. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because I wanna see what you guys built. So I made it out of aluminum foil and it floats, but I forgot my sails, so it's not gonna go very far. It may ride a little, but it's gonna sink.
And can I say something else my boat has?
Is it Wenzel?
Yeah.
We're going to do my favorite part, and I know it's the favorite part of some of you too. We are going to do a Mad-Lib. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. So if you are not familiar with how a Mad-Lib works, we're going to fill in the blanks with different parts of speech. So if it's a noun, we're looking for a person, place, or thing. An adjective is a describing word like pretty, friendly, huge. Verb is that action word, so jump, run, dancing. And a past tense verb usually ends in ed. It's something that already happened. So it could be like pushed, or it could be hit or found. So we are going to fix my screen here in a second. Try to make it a little bigger so you guys can see. So we are going to do this one where we have Zeus. So can somebody give me a noun? Anybody want to shout out a noun for me?
Flag.
I got a couple different ones there. Haley, you want to give me a noun?
A flower.
Right. How about Wenzel? You want to give me an adjective or a describing word?
Beautiful.
Okay. How about Taylor? You want to give me a noun?
Yeah, I know this actual story.
A plant.
Mars.
Right.
Supposed to be blue.
How about Zachariah? You want to give me another adjective?
This is supposed to be.
There's another Zachariah.
An adjective. Colorful.
Sophia, you want to give me another adjective?
Look at that hair you made. This is supposed to be fire.
Sophia, you got an adjective, a describing word?
Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay. How about, is it Rima? Want to give me another adjective, another describing word?
Yep. Up here, for some reason,
That one?
I'm like,
You want me to come back to you? You want to give me a noun instead?
oh, can I give you a noun?
A noun. New York.
Okay. And you want to give me an adjective? You're really good at those.
It's supposed to be fire. What's that?
Bumpy.
Lumpy. All right, let's go to the second part of the story. How about another noun?
I'm insane.
So, Kaylin, you want to give me a noun?
A noun. First place or thing.
Snowman.
Snowman? All right. Mark, you want to give me an adjective or describing word?
Adjective. Describing word.
Maybe person.
That's not an adjective.
Play scissor.
An adjective, so something to describe. So like quick, purple, huge, small.
Let's post those. No, they do not know what they're talking about.
Humongous.
All right.
The big heavy snowman.
I think I just spelled that wrong. I did. I'm not the best at spelling. All right, a verb, so that action word. Anybody want to call one out? Rima, you want to give me a verb?
Jump.
Jumping.
Jumping.
All right. How about an adjective?
All right.
Rima?
Colorful.
Sophia, you want to give me another verb? Another action word?
Yeah, a verb. Going.
Okay. And then another adjective.
One of the buttons would be colorful. And
Raja, you want to go?
Yeah.
Okay,
How
give me
about
an
huge?
adjective.
that is what they
Huge?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I think this is the almost done. We've got a few more. So we need another verb ending in ing. Hudson, you want to give me
Running.
a verb? And oh, I heard running.
Action word.
How about a past tense verb? So an action that you already did.
Van. Stole.
Ran.
Jumped.
Okay, I'll use jump for the next one. How about a noun? Rima, you want to give me a noun?
Flower.
All right. How about a plural noun? So more than one.
Flowers. Flowers.
Hudson, did you give me a plural noun?
Watering. Waters.
Waters. Okay. How about a past tense verb? Sophia?
Sophia.
Ran.
Okay. And another noun. So, is it Sawi?
Flower.
I think I may have said your name wrong. Where'd you go? Is it Sawi?
Sour.
Do you want to give me a noun?
She's not even focused.
Oh, well, do you want to give me a noun then? Person, place, or thing?
Cave.
A cave?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see, another plural noun, so more than one. Kaylin?
Boxes.
Boxes. Okay, a past tense verb, so something that you already did.
Ran.
Ran. We're doing a lot of running. Wenzel, you want to give me another
Flew.
past tense verb?
Blue. Or fly.
Capture. Okay, and then a noun. I heard the word fly as a past tense verb, but we're going to use it as a noun. I kind of like that there. So let's see what our story says. So it says, once upon a time, a long time ago, Zeus ordered Hephaestus not sure how to say that one, to make him a daughter. He quickly made a woman out of flour. She was a beautiful woman, and he named her Pandora. Zeus sent his new plant Pandora down to Earth so she could marry a colorful, beautiful man named Epimetheus. Jupiter was not being lumpy. Say it again.
Empathius.
Epimetheus? Thank you.
Yeah.
So Jupiter was not being lumpy. He was getting even. Zeus was mad at the brothers. Say it.
Empathius.
Epimetheus and Prometheus for giving people New York without asking Zeus first. Zeus gave Pandora a little box with a big, heavy snowman on it. He made her humongous promise never to open the box. He gave the key to Pandora's husband and told him to never jump in the box. Zeus was certain that jumping the box. Zeus was certain that one of the brothers would be colorful and would go in the box. But it was Pandora who was curious. She wanted to see what was inside the box. But I keep getting that one wrong. Epimetheus said, no, better not. You know your father, referring to Zeus. He's a huge one. One day when Epimetheus lay running, Pandora ran the key and loudly opened the box. Out jumped every kind of disease and sickness, hate and flour, and all the bad things that waters had never experienced before. Pandora slammed the lid closed, but it was too late. All the bad things were already out of the box. They ran away out into the cave. Epimetheus woke up at the sound of her sobbing. I opened the box and all these ugly boxes ran out, she cried. I tried to capture them, but they all got out. Pandora opened the box to show him how empty it was. The box was not quite empty. One tiny bug flew quickly out before Pandora could slam the lid shut again. Hello, Pandora, said the bug, hovering just out of reach. My name is Hope. With a nod of thanks for being set free, Hope flew out into the world, a world that now held envy, crime, fly, and disease, and hope. Zeus knew that if the nasty things ever got free, the world would need hope to keep going. So that's a pretty good story. It's kind of a true story in the sense that it is a myth, but you guys put a pretty funny twist on it. So that is actually all the time we have for today. So I thank you guys for joining me, and I hope you guys had fun learning about Odysseus and building boats. So that is our last series for this year, for this summer. So if you would like, if you didn't see the first few, I think they are going to be up on YouTube shortly on the Delaware Libraries page. But I hope you guys have a great day and had as much fun as I did. Bye.
Can I tell you something?